So welcome guys, welcome to this Dynatrace course wherein we just talk about the architecture. So let's have a quick look at the architecture. As you're looking at the slide, this is the architecture of the Dynatrace, and this seems to be a popular interview question. Whenever you say that you worked on Dynatrace, usually the interviewer, the first question they would ask is, do you know the architecture of Dynatrace? So basically we'll cover that one. And the second interview question usually is, if the performance warehouse is down, would you be still able to see the data? Yes, from the session store. Okay, performance warehouse would store certain kind of data and session storage would store certain kind of data. So if this is down, so whatever the data that is there in the session store, you will be able to see. So these are the two interview questions people usually ask. One is the architecture of the Dynatrace and one is this one. Okay, so let's go through the architecture of the of the Dynatrace. Then we'll go through this interview question. Once you understand the architecture, you would then at that point of time you would understand the difference between these two warehouses. First things first. Okay, let's say this is your application. So whatever you are seeing over here on the top, it has nothing to do with the Dynatrace, but it is your application under test. Okay, so let me use my pen here. Yes, so whatever you're seeing over here, this is related to your application under test, AUT. Okay, so let's say your application under test is Amazon. Okay, and you have this web server for Amazon, and these two are the app servers for Amazon, and let's say that's the database server for your Amazon. Okay, so so this is your application under test and this server belongs to Amazon. Now you wanted to configure the Dynatrace to monitor this Amazon servers. So what would you do is you install these agents. These agents with these specs on that, these agents belongs to Dynatrace, not your application under test. So this agents which is belonging to Dynatrace, you have to install it on these servers here. And here in fact we don't use the word install, we use the term called instrument. We use the term called instrument, not install. So basically you have to instrument each of these servers with the Dynatrace agents. So once you instrument, let's talk about this Java. Okay, so this server, typically it will be an application server. So this application server you have to monitor, you have to instrument a Java agent on this particular application server so that it will extract the information from this server and further send it for further processing. Send it to the Dynatrace stuff for further processing. So the process of installing this particular agent on this app server is nothing but the instrumentation. And once the instrumentation is done, this piece of code, small program, I wouldn't say a piece of code, a small program which is belonging to the Dynatrace, which we usually call it as an agent, sits on this app server continuously gathering all the information from this app server and send it for further processing. Same thing happens with the other servers as well, may it be a database, may it be an app server, or may it be a web server or any other server as mentioned over here. Okay, so this agent is nothing but a small piece of program which sits on your servers. Okay, so similarly if you wanted to monitor the web servers, it needs to be instrumented with the Dynatrace agent. Same thing with the database and other stuff. So this agent belongs to the Dynatrace and this is your servers. So once it is instrumented, some of your work is done. Okay, now let's see what happens. This agent will be continuously monitoring those servers, gathering the data and send that data to the collectors. To the collectors, as the name suggests, it collects the information. It collects the information from various agents. So typically in a big organization you would have maybe 20 to 30 servers, not just belonging to your application, but all these applications, you know, they belong to different applications. Usually an enterprise contains a lot of applications So each application could contain 2 to 3 servers. So typically the whole organization might have 30 to 40 servers. So you'd have 30 to 40 agents sitting on each one of those host machines. So it will be gathering all the information. So here we are talking about only certain, let's say we talk about the web server and 2 app servers and the database server. Okay, for this application. So they will be continuously sending the information to the collectors. As the name suggests, it is collecting the information from the agents. So you could have multiple collectors and basically it's a failover. Okay, in case one collector fails, the agents can continue to send the information to the other collectors. So as you see, it's a failover. It's a failover collectors. Okay, so basically these collectors would send the information to this server. This is your main server. This is your main server, or people usually call this as an Appmon server, application monitoring server, or the main server. Main server I'm saying because it's main. It is the centralized server. Some people call it as a Dynatrace centralized server. Different people call it different ways, but I would call theoretically it needs to be called as an Appmon server, which is the main server for all of that. So this Appmon server gets the information from these collectors, and basically correlates something what we call it as a pure path. Later on we'll introduce this term, what is a pure path, at the later point of time. It's a data collected. Right now it just say that pure path is the data collected by these agents, which is sent to the collectors, which are sending it to the servers. So this Appmon server. So it correlates that pure path, or kind of process that pure path and stores that information in this session storage. So it's not only the pure path data that it processes and sends it to the session storage or the session store, but typically, like, you know, these agents will collect something called a memory dump and the thread dump. So that will be processed and stored it in this session storage as well. Okay, so typically what is stored in the session storage? There are 2 kinds of data. One is pure path related data. One is the pure path related data. So I'm writing this with the mouse, so please excuse me for the handwriting. So pure path related data and memory and thread dump. Memory and thread related data. I wouldn't say dump, but memory and thread related data that will be stored on this session storage. So the Appmon server collects that information and stores it over here, and the other data, whatever the data which is not a pure path data and memory and thread related data, all that data will be stored in the performance warehouse. All that other data will be stored in the performance warehouse. So all the other data other than the pure path related data or the memory or thread dumps will be stored in the performance warehouse. Typically it's a time series data is what they call it, or measures is what they call it. So that data will be stored in the performance warehouse. Okay, before I talk about the front server and the client, now I'm going to talk about something. So this is there is an interview question: in case if the performance warehouse is down for whatever the reason, then would you be able to still see the data? Yes, there is certain data which is stored in the performance warehouse which you won't be able to see, which is the time series data or the measure data, but the memory and thread dump and the pure path related data which is not there in the performance warehouse, you'll be able to see it because it's stored in the session storage. So that's an important interview question. So coming back to the architecture now. Yes, now the next data is the front end server. Next server is the front end server. Whatever, this is your client from where you will be seeing the data, where you will be accessing the data. As a Dynatrace end user, you would be opening the client, and from the client you will be able to see all the data which is collected from the collectors, which is processed by the server. So whatever the data that you are requesting, that data usually will be processed by this front end server. Typically there could be some data analysis that could be done before it should display the data. So to offload some work from this Appmon main server, that kind of data analysis will be done by this front-end server, which will be shown by the clients. So this is what a big level what architecture looks like. So I'll have a quick recap as to what it is. This is your application under test. Different servers are there. So let's say this is your web server. These two are your app servers, and let's say that's the database server. So each server needs to be instrumented, which means that an agent of your Dynatrace needs to be instrumented on these servers, and these agents will be continuously collecting the information from the server. Once the agent collects that information, it will send that it's a real time. It will be continuously collecting the information, and it will be sending the information to the collectors. You could have more than one collectors, which would work as a failover, which means that if one collector is down, the agents can continue to send the data to the other collectors. Okay, so these collectors will not keep the data, will further send this data to the Appmon main server, and this Appmon main server will further process that data, or you can say correlate the pure path data and all the other related data, and depending on the data, it will either store it in the session storage or the performance warehouse. Typically on the session storage, a pure path related data or memory and thread dumps will be stored in this session storage, and all the other data like measure and time series data will be stored in this performance warehouse. And well related to this client, this is where you will be able to see the data, or whatever the data that is collected, you will be able to see it from your front end, which is a UI. And when you access certain things from the UI, it needs to the data needs to be further processed, which will be done by this front end server. They have specifically given this server so that they can offload some of the work from this main server. So we'll go through the same things in the form of a slide, just to make sure that nothing has been missed. You see Appmon main server. So this is the server we are talking about. So so you see Appmon server is just a service. As you have seen multiple services, this is a service, is a core component of the Appmon environment. As I've told you, it's a main component. It correlates pure path data that it receives from the agent via Appmon collectors and stores this in the session storage. So you see it correlates or collects this pure path data which the agent is sending to the collectors, which is collected to this Appmon server. It correlates that data which will be stored in the session storage. It stores the thread and memory dumps in the session storage. As you can see, not only the pure path related data, but the memory and thread dump data will be stored in this session storage, and Appmon server will be doing that stuff for us. So that's what is the Appmon server. The next one is Appmon frontend server, which is what we are talking about, this server here. So the frontend server handles the data analysis task that the Appmon client triggers. As I've told you, when you as a Dynatrace user wanted certain information, that the data might not be readily available in a way that it can show you, so it needs further processing, and that data analysis or the processing will be done by this front-end server. The Appmon client connects to this front-end server, which is quite evident from this particular diagram. And finally, the Appmon front-end server must be on the same machine and the Appmon server. This is very, very important. These two servers should be on the same machine. So yeah, this is one server which is missed and which is not there in our Dynatrace architecture diagram as well. So this is the memory analysis server, and it is purely for the post-processing memory snapshots. As you can see, it is not online. Once everything is done, you wanted to process it offline. Post-processing is more like offline. So the memory, you'll be able to see the memory snapshot on the Dynatrace, and to process that memory snapshot, you have this memory analysis server. Separately, a server is done for analyzing the memory as in your RAM or your objects. So for processing that, there is a separate server which is given by the Appmon, as this requires a lot of data, and the Appmon server already is doing a lot of work. So offload some work from the Appmon server. They have given this memory analysis server only to analyze the memory or process the memory related data. So as you can see, the memory analysis server is purely for post-processing memory snapshot to offload the resource usage of the Appmon server. As I've told you, to offload some of the work from the Appmon server, this has been done. The memory analysis server can run on same machine and the Appmon server. Already we know that the front-end server is running on the same machine and the Appmon server. So the memory analysis server can do it. You see, if you have a sufficient memory and the processing resources, it can be done on the same Appmon server. But typically it will be this will be installed on another server or on another host. So you see, you may need a separate machine or a separate host machine for huge memory snapshots. And Appmon performance warehouse, we have already seen that. So this is the warehouse that we are talking about. We already talked about the session storage. Now we are talking about the performance warehouse. As you can see, Appmon performance warehouse stores processed. You see, it stores processed memory and time series data that the agent serves. So as I've told you, this is not the pure path data or the memory and thread dump, but it is the measure and time series data, and it stores the processed data. Okay, so why this session storage and the performance warehouse is storing the data? Because after the monitoring is done, at the later point of time, you wanted that data, you can always go back to that and get the data, because this data is stored in the performance warehouse and the session storage. If the data is not stored in this warehouse and the session storage, you will be able to look at the data online. But once the whole monitoring is done, you will not be able to look it up because you don't have the storage. So the storage is very, very important to look at the data after the monitoring is done. So depending on the complexity and data volume, this can be on a local database on the same machine or a high performance database server. Okay, typically you want a database server, and typically it's a SQL server. Okay. So typically, what I heard is it is a SQL server on which all this time series data will be stored. And we already know that the pure path and thread dump memory block dumps will be stored on the session storage. And finally, the Appmon client is from where you will be able to look at the data, whether it's online or it could be offline as well. So I hope you understood the Dynatrace architecture, and hope it will help you with your interviews.